As you're aware, this is an exclusive webinar trilogy that we are pulling together. And the theme of this is about the leadership leap. And this came about in one of our recent webinars we did. I think it was in October, Siobhan, with Claire White. And the question came up. I mean, are CX practitioners landing at the boardroom table, or are they working in the C-suite? And we felt at the time, no, they're not. And we said we should put something together to address that. And this is the first of this trilogy to look at this. And Kingsley Aikins, who I'll give you an introduction to in a second, is going to cover about that whole area of getting noticed and how to build your leadership presence within your organization. And then on May the 18th, if some of you have already signed up for it, Ian Golding is joining us, and he's going to talk about how to influence amongst the C-suite once you're in that space. And then Claire White, who kicked this conversation off with us some time ago, is coming in on June 10th. And we're talking about really how do we sustain that role of leadership once you're up there, and we'll talk about the tips, etc. So to get things started, if you don't mind, allow me a brief introduction to Kingsley Aikins. Kingsley is a good friend of ours, and he's also actually a member of our International CX Advisory Council. Kingsley is the globally recognized expert on networking and Diaspora, and he is the founder of the CEO of the Networking Institute, and he's lived in 6 countries working with governments, corporations, international agencies such as the EU, the UN, and the World Bank. My God, Kingsley, I'm losing the plot here. Kingsley's contributions to business and philanthropy are widely recognized, as he was awarded a CBE in 2008 for his work on British-Irish relations. And something many people wouldn't know about Kingsley is that he's recognized as being a world-class links golfer. And when Tiger Woods was asked to comment on Kingsley's golf game, he said, "Never heard of the bloke." Kingsley, you are most welcome to join us here today.
Thank you, Michael. You just reminded me of when Muhammad Ali was asked who is his toughest opponent, and he said, "My first wife." So yeah, so listen, that introduction was completely and utterly way over the top, vastly exaggerated. But Michael, I have to admit, it was exactly the same as the one I emailed you last week. So I do appreciate you plugging me on all fronts, but I'm just a regular Joe, as you know. Anyway, back to you.
Oh, you're great. Well, listen, I wanted to kick off. So, I mean, even if we look at the opening slide here, we talk about the leadership leap, getting noticed and building your CX leadership presence. I mean, for me, I wanted to open up the quote that supports this is basically performance accounts for only 10% of career success, while image and exposure make up the other 90%. So let's kick off, Kingsley. Why is performance alone not enough to get you noticed in today's business world?
Well, look, those numbers were actually they're taken from a book by a guy called Harvey Coleman, who was a U.S. writer, and he broke down the constituent element that goes towards, if you like, career progress, and he said performance is 10%, which is outrageous, Michael, as you know. It's absolutely bonkers. Surely that's daft. Surely doing a super job, do a great job, and you will soar.
Yeah.
And he says, no. He says doing a great job is the minimum. It's kind of mandatory. It gets you on the ladder. It doesn't get you up the ladder. It gets you on the pitch. It gets you into what he calls the stadium of competition. He had an interesting line. He said, you get paid on performance. You get promoted on what other people think of your potential. It was really interesting because he introduces these 2 pesky little words, other people. Now, I'm a big fan of this concept of other people, because when you think about it, Michael, you'll never get a job unless other people agree to it. You'll never get a promotion unless other people agree to it. You'll never get increase of wages and compensation unless other people agree to it. You'll never get married unless other people agree to it. So in other words, other people hold the keys to your career progress. Decisions made by other people are going to have a massive impact on your life. So really that means relationships, it means connections, it means all that kind of stuff plays a role. So he's not really saying that performance is not important, but he is introducing those pesky little words of other people. And every major decision about your career is going to be made by a group of people sitting around a table in a room, and you won't be in that room. So their decisions, their concept, their view on you, their perception of you, all are really important. So, he's not saying it's not important. It's just that he's saying it's only about 10%. And as you said, those other elements, the image he says is 30%. Then he says career progress depends 60% on exposure. So those are the other elements which become really, really important.
Phenomenal. And because Kingsley, when we grew up, it was about performance. When we were growing up, it was about you had a job, do your job, and you will be okay. Now, we were unlike the Americans. The Americans, I always remember, because I spent my early career over there, they would always recognize talent no matter what the age, and you would climb. Whereas I think in other markets, you would have to just kind of do your time before you took that next step or you were promoted. I mean, is that still the case, or is it now more global that if you have that talent, if you have that visibility, you're now being moved forward?
Well, I think, if you sort of dig into the other elements that he talked about, it's like an apple pie, isn't it? The slice, is it, what he talks about then, this whole area of image, which is, who are you as an individual? What do people think of you? What's your reputation? Now, the reputation is a really interesting thing because your reputation follows you around. But here's what's interesting. Very often your reputation actually precedes you. People have a notion, a view of you, even before they've ever come across you. So your image, do you bring problems? Do you bring solutions? Can people imagine when they look at you, can they imagine you at kind of at the next level? I mean, do you look, sound, and act like somebody who could be a leader in an organization? Because the way it is Michael, to get the part, you got to look and sound the part. So that whole area of perception is important. He says perception is the co-pilot of reality. And he had a good line in there. He said, future leadership of your organization will not be by unknown people. I think that's a pretty fair comment. So people outside of your immediate circle are going to have a big influence on your life.
Amazing. And this whole area of kind of visibility, how can we deliver that? How can we influence our visibility in the organization without being seen as a dramatic kind of stair climber? I mean, how does one do that?
Look, I think you bring up a very good point because it is a balance. We all know the self promoter, the person who's pushing themselves out there. And yet, on the other hand, we also know the person who's totally invisible, that nobody knows anything about them. And so, where is that kind of balance between those things? There's a guy called Tom Peters. You might have remembered him. He wrote In Search of
Sure,
Excellence, but he
the four P's.
came up with this concept of Me Inc. You are a company called Me Inc. and you're responsible for your own career development. You are the managing director, the head of finance, the head of HR of this organization called Me Inc. So you got to take responsibility for your own career progress. You got to develop your own career playbook. You got to invest in yourself. You got to build relationships at a horizontal level and kind of at a vertical level. You actually have to build, and I'm always a little nervous about this topic, Michael, but you have to build your personal brand. Um, and your personal brand, that's an important topic. Uh, and I'm always a bit nervous about it because I think it makes you sound like a tin of beans or something. But actually, whether you like it or not, we all have a personal brand. In fact, not having a personal brand is having a personal brand, if you kind of see what I mean. And your personal brand is it's not what you say it is, it's what other people say about you. That notion that Jeff Bezos' definition of your reputation is what somebody says about you when you're not in the room. So I think you got to make a decision about things. Do you want to decide what your personal brand is, or do you want other people to decide what it is? And if you let other people decide what your personal brand is, it's generally not the personal brand you're kind of all that happy with. And as you know, I mean, successful people tend to be successful brands, and people pay more for a brand than they do for a generic product. And so you got to decide, do you want to be in the driving seat when it comes to your personal brand, or do you want to be in the passenger seat? And I recommend being in the driving seat. And the reality of the world we live in is every day we're kind of being judged. We live in a world where you're either Googling or being Googled. And if I Google your name, Michael, the first thing that comes up is your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
Now, 1.4 billion people are on LinkedIn globally. So the reality is people are going to be checking you out online. And here's,
I thought you were going to say the first thing that comes up is a wanted poster, but thank you for dropping in the LinkedIn vibe. I like that, Kingsley. Thank you.
but I do training for LinkedIn here in Dublin because it's their European headquarters here, and I try do some stuff in there. They were telling me the other day that yeah, there's 1.4 billion people on LinkedIn, but only 1% post anything, which I found kind of fascinating.
Wow.
Isn't that an amazing statistic? So, think about this, Michael. Over 1 billion people have told this company, here's all my education details, here's all my work experience, here's who I know, here's what I spend my time, my hobbies and sports. You can have it for free. Isn't that incredible? So, in terms of data, in terms of information, in terms of finding out about people, wow, what an incredible tool that we're sort of sitting on there.
But Kingsley, isn't this whole thing about it, when I read a profile, and I do it regularly. Absolutely, if I'm speaking to somebody for the first time in a networking environment, I will look them up and but I'm not getting the true vibe, the real authentic vibe of what this individual is like. I'm reading something that has genuinely been written by that individual, and it may not reflect exactly what that person is like. Versus somebody sitting down with me and saying, "Mike, you need to have a chat with Kingsley." And I would trust that individual, so therefore I'd be getting a more unbiased opinion of that individual. Is that where networking is so much more important?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, um, we live in a world now where, of course, we've got to be high tech, but we also got to be high touch. And I actually think we're paying the hidden cost of COVID. And the hidden cost of COVID is that our networks have shrunk. We've tended
Wow.
to hunker down with friends, family, and just a few business connections, what I call the inner concentric ring of our network. And we've kind of let slip where we have a lot of strong emotional ties. But we've let slip the outer concentric ring where we have a lot of weak ties or what we call loose associations. But that's where opportunity lies. And as a result, companies and individuals, I think, and countries are dealing with five really interesting challenges right now. This hidden cost of COVID, I go. Firstly, there's less business development happening. Secondly, there's less learning on the job, and this is a big issue for the next
Mm,
generation coming through. And every CEO I talk to says that the next generation coming through, they're fantastic, they're deductive, they're analytical, they're very impressive education and background, etc., and completely crap at soft skills. So they will text, not talk. They won't pick up the phone. So there's an interesting whole generational shift and challenge that we're dealing with now. And I think that that kind of feeds into a few things. I mean, I think feeds into everything from mental health to actual, I think the great crisis of our times and is actually loneliness and isolation.
mhm.
So, when I ask people sometimes in a group, I say, when you look back on your life, what were the most memorable experiences you had? Were they spent in front of a screen or were they spent with other people? And of course, they'll all say it was spent with other people. So it's a particular current challenge given the incredible and impressive, and I'm a big fan of AI and technology, etc. But I am concerned if we're not getting that balance right, which I think you were hinting at in your question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Uh,
absolutely. And sorry, go ahead, jump in, Siobhan. Pardon me.
Yeah, that point that you make, Kingsley, really resonates with me around the younger generation. So capable, like they're digital natives. They're so comfortable with tech. But I'm seeing that and hearing that myself in organizations that are very human centric or should be very human centric. New employees aren't as comfortable with having conversations with general members of the public. They have to be trained on how to pick up the phone to people, how to have conversations with people. And I suppose it probably leads to, in terms of networking for people that are a little bit, and that generation that are a little bit more um, less comfortable with those softer skills, those interpersonal skills. How do they get themselves comfortable with networking, with getting out there and making those connections in real life, not just online?
Well, first of all, I have to say, um, most people hate networking. I mean, it's just got a sleazy, slimy image. It's for insincere, inauthentic people late at night in a bar flicking out business cards. You wake up in the morning, you find Michael Colleen's business card and they turn up your trousers. Where did that come from? What happened last night? So I think that's one of the great challenges networking has, is that it's a pretty grim sort of topic. On the other hand, having a strong and diverse network is not a luxury. It's a
Mm,
necessity. It's kind of not a kind of a nice to have. It's a must have. And I think we all tend to have two types of networks. We tend to have an organic network, which we just kind of inherited. It's to do with friends and family and your neighborhood and your buddies and all that kind of stuff. And it just happens. But as you progress through your career, and if you want to become a leader in your career, you have to think about another type of network. You have to think about a network which is thoughtful, intentional, and strategic. That just doesn't happen. You actually have to go out and create that. And a lot of people think networking is for people who are very sociable, so, it's for people who are extroverts. But actually, and I find it curious, actually, introverts can be better at networking than extroverts. And why is that? Because they do it with decency, authenticity, and integrity. They ask questions, they listen,
Yeah.
they start sentences with who, what, where, when, why, and how, and finish with a question mark. The extrovert wants to wow you, wants to impress you, wants to drop names, wants to look over your shoulder, find somebody more interesting than Michael Colleen to talk to. And the reality is that most of us, in any group of people, I'd be fascinated by your group on today, about a third would be introverts, about a third would be extroverts, but about a third are, and I think I fall in this category, would be ambiverts. And an ambivert is somebody who really, really enjoys being out and about, social activities, loves all that stuff, but very much needs time to recharge, needs time away from
mm,
all of that. And I think there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. And I like to think of your network, think of your network as being like an orchestra. And an orchestra is made up of people with fantastic skills in wind instruments and string instruments and percussion instruments. And you're the conductor of this orchestra. And when they all come together, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And I think that's what you want your network to be. If everybody in the orchestra played the same instrument, it'd be a pretty gruesome sound.
Hmm.
The genius of an orchestra is the difference, is the diversity.
mm,
And that's the same for your network, particularly at a world now where we're living in very multicultural, very cosmopolitan societies, etc. And that is a challenge for us because we have a tendency only to spend time with people who are just like us. When you think about it, we're born into families like us. We go to school and college with us. We play sport with us. We go on holidays with people like us. We marry people like us, and we produce more people like us. But actually, that's not what the world today is about. The world today is about extraordinary diversity. I mean, there is this concept, it's a Greek. I always like to use a bit of Greek, Michael, as you know. It's the concept of homophily. And homophily is the tendency we all have to spend
mm,
time with people who are just like us. And it's kind of a natural instinct. I'm sure I do it. But we need to be aware of that. And all the research from the Deloittes and the McKinseys and all these great houses, will say that people who have strong and diverse networks, they actually live longer, are stronger mentally and physically, earn more money, and are happier. Kind of like all of those. So that's a pretty good ad, for building strong and
mm.
diverse networks.
Kingsley, I like Siobhan's kind of comment about the youth today and the fact that they're much more tech oriented. What are you seeing, Kingsley, from universities in terms of graduates who are coming out of universities today? They're learning a very specific discipline, whatever it is they're studying. I mean, are you seeing the universities trying to support this kind of whole process of maybe soft and hard skills? Is that something you come across?
No, and I've talked to most of the presidents of the universities here and colleges, etc. So schools and colleges don't teach this stuff. Think about
Okay.
progress at school or college is a function of a grade, a score, a mark. It's a metric, it's a number. And it's got nothing to do with the person sitting beside you. And then you get into the real world of work. And there's a whole series of things that count, but can't be counted. Things like resilience, determination, grit, attitude, humor, and as we say in Ireland, crack. These things all matter a lot. They count a lot, but they can't be counted. And so big they tend to be discounted. So I think it's one of the challenges. I've been interested from other countries as well. This importance of having a more rounded product. I hate to use that word product coming out of the universities. In other words, of course you need your hard technical skills, but I also think you need soft skills. In fact, I actually think that when you think about you think about we all years ago, was a lot of attention, and there was always been a lot of attention to physical health, and I think that's great and really important. And increasingly over the last decades, I think mental health has gone sort of on the front page, on the front foot. But I actually think the coming one is going to be social health. I think that's
Wow.
different. I think that's a new concept, and I think it's going to be because the price we're paying for excessive use of technology. There's a woman called Sherry Turkle, an American writer. She's written a book called Alone Together. And what she says, because of technology, we're all together, but we're all alone in front of a screen.
Yeah.
I don't want to go on a rant about this, but I do think it's an interesting topical topic we all have to address.
It's so true. And here I am. I'm in the rural Ireland now, and I've chosen that for many different reasons. But I do feel that loneliness not being in the office as I used to. And I know that's a whole different argument. And I suppose, but again, I'm still kind of in that youth group. They must find this networking difficult, Kingsley, when they're coming into offices, etc., working from home, etc. I mean, is it, is anybody addressing this? Is anybody? I mean, I know you have your own training programs, and I suspect that the youth market is probably benefiting from how to be visible. Because what we've said already is, the self promoter was always looked down upon. However, what you're also saying is no, self promotion is now critical. How does one do it and not be looked down upon? I know, and I know we've referenced that there's two or three of your books that we've indexed on our chat, so people should download those because there's lots of tips there. But just in summary, how do you self promote without being looked down upon?
Well, I think you've got to buy into and accept the importance of building social capital. And I think financial capital, we all understand that. Human capital is kind of what you know, but social capital is not within you. It's actually between you and other people, and it's something that you need to access. The knowledge that you have is your human capital, but the knowledge that you can access, that's your social capital. And companies want to hire people who have strong social capital because that's so important for them because of the fact that so many people are quite weak in this area. So I think that it needs to be inculcated at an educational level. I mean, I've noticed some schools now here in Ireland are not allowing kids have their cell phones during their mobile phones during the day. They got to put them in a locker. I think that could go fairly mainstream, because as we increasingly realize the price we're paying for that. But I do think you asked the question about what should people do. I think we need to inculcate them with the sense of the importance of this topic, and that there is a process around it. It's not an art or a science. It's a process, and there's and the books I've written, and I lay out a very precise process of how you build a strong and diverse network. And the first element of that is you actually have to audit your network. You actually have to you know actually print off your network and look at it. And when you do that exercise, and I do it on a regular basis, it's quite interesting because firstly, you can clean up your network. You've got, pubs in Ballyconneely or somewhere that, you don't need to have them anymore, takeaway stores or whatever. So you can clean, we sometimes say, prune your network and watch it grow. And when you do that research element of this four-step networking process, you actually then realize, there's whole gaps in my network where I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody in aircraft leasing or reinsurance or tourism or whatever the topic is. So you can actually fill those gaps. But the other
Yeah.
thing you discover, and I discovered this during COVID, I had some terrific dormant connections. People I knew really, really well in other countries, other places. I've just completely let them slip and let them drop. And I actually, on a weekly basis, called one of these people in different places. And I had some fantastic connections, and it was a really interesting experience. So we all have those kind of dormant connections.
Yeah.
Then,
And
not
Is there anything
everybody,
around timeliness, in terms of how old your network is? Is that something? I mean, you talk about pruning? Or do people just naturally fall out of your network? Is that something that any thoughts about?
I think a little bit depends on your career. I mean, if you join a
Mm.
company at 18, you leave it. My dad left school at 14, and he joined a company and he left that company age 77. So
Wow.
63 years in one company, right?
Wow.
And in those days, companies outlive people. But now people outlive companies, you know, and the average length of somebody in a company is really quite low. And the average length of somebody in a C-suite position is as low as 7 years in many industries. So that's a complete shift. And yet people are living well into their 80s. And people have, well, I guess I'm in it. I'm in my third act now. So, you know, and I'm active, very active in it. So I think that's a dynamic that's out there, which didn't really exist in the past.
Brilliant, brilliant. I wanted to give you a break for a second, Kingsley and Siobhan. One of the things I noted is that over 65, nearly 70% of the people attending this session right now are female. And for me, it's really about, you know, what have your experiences been during your career in terms of networking? Is it easier to network as a man versus a woman? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well,
yeah.
Sorry, Kingsley. Yeah, I suppose the way I see it is, and look, it's fact, the world we live in is, and the world we work in, and the world we network in is and was designed by and for men largely. And it was typically men who had a wife at home, who looked after the children, looked after the home. And in Ireland, up until the 1970s, and I think this is similar in a lot of other countries, up until the 1970s, when women got married, they were expected to leave the workforce or forced to leave the workforce. So I do think women are just as good at networking as men are, but we do it in a very different way. Like I remember at the very early days of my career, one of my bosses, bring me to her desk, and we were working on something, and she was asked me to get involved in a project. And I remember the phrase she used was, "It'll be really good for your exposure." And I was very new, or I was junior. I was at the early stages of my career, and it's something that really stuck with me in terms of, you know, how important your exposure is, you know, and Kingsley used that line earlier around it's the potential that others, it's not your how you progress isn't just about your performance. It's about how the potential that other people see in you. And that is, and they're not going to see that if you're sitting at your desk doing an amazing job at just what you're meant to do. I think you use another quote, you know, you're not going to make those connections sitting at your desk or sitting at your computer. So I think women, back to your point, is it different? Is it easier? I think it is different. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult in some ways if these environments are kind of designed with men in mind. But I think women are amazing at it. We're amazing at building deep connections and building relationships. And sometimes I think maybe one of the things, and this is speaking for myself, I won't generalize, is that maybe we're not as strategic about it. Maybe, you know, we're good at building those relationships. Maybe we're not as good at calling on people when we need it and knocking on doors. I'm one of the, what I like to think I'm one of the people who actually enjoy networking. I like meeting new people. But another thing that occurred to me as you were talking, Kingsley and Michael, was the question you asked about, you know, is college and school preparing people to be able to network and building these skills? And you described it as, you know, you're focusing on a very individualistic performance in work and in school and in college. You're focused on your grades, whereas actually where you get the skills that allow you to network and enable you to network are probably in team sports. And again, you know, the percentage of men who continue in team sports is probably higher than it is for women. We know that it's a fact. And actually, if you look at, there's research done around the backgrounds of the women at C-suite level, and a huge majority of those women have a team sport or a sporting background. So I think, you know, so while school mightn't be addressing it and developing those skills, I think, you know, team sports are a fantastic way of doing it. And again, you know, if we're looking at those younger generations and our children and that, you know, making sure that we are giving them a diverse network, you know, when you're whether that's choosing their schools, you know, choosing their extracurricular activities, all has a massive impact. I think for women, yeah, I think we're amazing at it. We're amazing at creating connections, really building trust. Again, you know, for myself, maybe, you know, you used the three terms, Kingsley: thoughtful. I think women absolutely are that. Intentional and strategic were the other two. If, as a woman, I feel they're probably two areas of that I would need to lean into a little bit more. But yeah, that
Kingsley, jump in on this.
Yeah. Sorry, I just a few thoughts on it. I read a book a little while ago by a woman called Marissa King. It's called Social Chemistry. And she said an interesting thing. She's a US professor. And she said during COVID, men's networks decreased by about 30%, and women's networks didn't decrease at all. And what she said, and I think there's some truth to this, she said men are quite transactional. You know, they like to do stuff with other men. They'll go for a pint, they'll play football, or they'll play golf, or go for a swim or something. That's quite transactional. Women get their highs, if you like, by communicating, connecting, collaborating with each other, much more so than men. So men are that kind of transactional sort of approach to things. The other thing I do hear from women when I bring up this question at workshops, etc., they'll say that, and I don't know, with an international audience today, I'd be interested to know what people think of this. They say in Ireland, networking is about two things: alcohol and sport. So
yeah,
it's gone to the rugger, gone to the GA, gone to the soccer, and you know, and people who aren't into either or both, I think, feel maybe a little bit excluded from that. I do think the education system is interesting now. And when I went to a single sex school, but my kids went to the co-ed schools, and I think that's quite important. And you know, they just treat each other completely equally.
Yeah.
But I don't feel I'm authorized to be able to give it much more comments on that issue. I think what you're saying makes more sense, Siobhan.
It's really interesting, and it's probably a subject matter that we're a bit risky in getting into too deeply, but there's a huge amount of feedback coming through on it. And I think, you know, the reason I say it is, you know, I've noted in my career in the CX industry that there is definitely a bias towards females working in it and doing very well in that space. So no harm in us addressing it, and please send questions over. In fact, Kingsley, there's a lot of questions coming through. And in fact, I think you're off to Saudi because they want you to speak at an event over there. So good luck to you. We'll be making intros later on. And anyway, look, this has been fascinating. And I know one of the things that we're very good at on these webinars is we keep things pretty tight. So what I'm going to do is, before we start on the questions, Kingsley, if there were 1, 2, or 3 things that this group could do tomorrow around networking, have you any thoughts around that? Now, before you answer that, I know that you have sent us over the 50 tips, so that document will be shared with everybody as part of this process. But just off the top of your head, based on the conversation we're having, what are the 3 key things that I could implement tomorrow to help me on the networking front?
I suppose picking up on what the last few minutes were really about and earlier, I think that whole area of soft skills are going to be critically important. And I think putting emphasis and attention to that, and just watching out for, you know, this notion that social health is going to become quite an important thing. I think that's a kind of a takeaway. I do think a couple of other things we didn't touch on, but when it comes to networking, I think being a world-class listener is possibly the most important thing in networking. And we live in a world where, frankly, most people don't listen. Most people only listen to prepare what they're going to say next. I always say they're listening for the gap. They're listening just so they can wait for the moment when there's a little gap and they can jump in. And many people, I won't say most, but many people are what I call narcissistic listeners. So if I say to you, Michael, I'm thinking of buying a car, and you say, you know what? I bought one last weekend. The guy wanted 20,000. I got him on 10,000. It's got a great radio. It's got red tires. It's fantastic. You've taken my topic and you've hijacked it and you've turned it into your topic. I don't give a stuff about you and your car, Michael. But that happens all the time. People take that. I call them narcissistic listeners. They take the topic that's being talked and they turn it into something for themselves. And then the other thing, the other tip, if you like, other thought I would have, which we didn't touch on, I think luck, serendipity, and chance plays an enormous part in our lives. But here's the question: can you make them? Are they things that happen to you, or are they things you can make happen for you? And I come from the latter school. I think you can make luck, chance, and serendipity work for you. But let's put it this way: they don't happen lying in bed or sitting at your desk. They happen when you're in motion, when you're out and about, when you put your talents on display, when you speak publicly, when you talk to strangers, when you seek out unlike-minded people, when you change your routines, when you do all that kind of stuff. I think I think planning gets you to the tip of the iceberg, but serendipity, luck, and chance gets you to the whatever the percentage is, six sevenths or seven eighths of the iceberg that's kind of underwater. And I mean, I'm sure, Michael, you and I over a pint, we could tell so many stories of how luck played a role in our lives. So I'm a big fan of that, and I don't think people are aware of it enough.
No, that is absolutely beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And we're going to get into Q&A now shortly. Siobhan, before we do that, anything to add to that in terms of if there was one thing you would advise somebody to do in this whole area of networking? Any thoughts on that? I'm putting you on the spot now.
No, no problem at all. I think if I look back at my own career, the things that have helped build my network have been being open to trying something new, whether that's working on a different project in work, whether that's if you're new in a role or new in an organization, going out for coffee with different people that you mightn't normally, or meeting other people that you wouldn't normally. So putting yourself outside your comfort zone a little bit. But I love the mention that Kingsley gave to serendipity, luck, and chance. And I don't know who came up with it, but it certainly wasn't me. I won't claim to coin it, but luck is where preparation meets opportunity, where you're prepared and you put yourself out there for the opportunity to happen. As you say, Kingsley, isn't at your desk.
Yeah, I love these little small little quirky things that you can make suggestions, and one of them in the tips that you're going to distribute is a thing called coffee roulette, which started in Australia, which is where in an organization or maybe in a department, you put everybody's name in a jar and you pick out two names, and those people have to go and have a cup of coffee in the next month. And the objective being to break down kind of silos within organizations. And I love the fact that so many of these things are small little things. Networking is not about any one big thing. It's about a series of small things, which if you implement on a regular, sustained basis, they actually become part of who you are. They become part of your own personal house style, if you like. And a whole series of these things, they're like this notion of marginal gains. Being a tiny bit better doesn't get you a tiny bit more, it gets you a whole lot more. So it's in the tips.
Love it. And you know what, Kingsley, it is so poignant for you to raise that, because if I were to, I think, Siobhan, you probably agree with me on this, the one big issue we have in our discipline of CX is breaking down silos. It is, getting different divisions, departments to start working together. And coffee roulette could be a very striking and easy task to put in, but very enjoyable too and engaging to start allowing people really get to know their compatriot on one side of the business. I've ever seen so many times when we bring different departments together, they all go, "Oh, I know, I've heard of you, I've never met you." And so, the coffee roulette, that's a stunning tip that hopefully people can take on board. Louise, before I ask you, but thank you again. You've got an amazing group of people from all over the world here with us today. So thank you very much. But just quickly, have you been keeping an eye on any of the questions that are coming through? I see there's about 50 questions, Kingsley. Don't worry, we won't get through them all. But any ones that stand out, Louise, in your head?
Yeah, we've lots of great questions. Emma asks, how would you assess or measure your current presence inside your organization as a CX leader to understand where you should focus?
Actually, I didn't quite catch that question. Sorry.
Yeah. So it's how would you assess or measure your current presence inside your organization as a CX leader to understand where you should focus?
So,
My next question, you answer that.
yeah, how would you assess? I mean, I think you would have to, first of all, take it for granted that networking is absolutely critical. I would be starting right there. Is this something that you would accept? And then, Kingsley, you in one of your books that we're sharing today, there are, I believe, 50 tips of that. But don't you also have a measurement book, the sort of way of how does one measure their performance in terms of their visibility in the organization?
Yeah, I mean, this whole webinar today actually, with respect, is a complete waste of time unless people take action. So, taking action, as the fellow says, if you don't take action, then quick as a flash, nothing happens. So, you know, and so one of the publications you're going to distribute is called Monthly Metrics. In other words, these are things you need to do, and we've actually gamified it. So I'll give you a little example. I suggest that every day you should turn a couple of emails with a phone call, because suddenly you've changed what is a kind of a formulaic kind of connectivity into something a little bit more personal. And guess what? You discover certain things, and it's no big deal to do that. Another one I have in there is because I do this all the time. I have a card of the Networking Institute, and I write handwritten notes to people. And I have a pen, I have ink, I have a stamp, I have a post box. I feel like Charles Dickens here. But I write every week. I'll send a few handwritten notes to people. And the reason is because I know they get that from nobody else. And also, there's an old line that says, what comes from the hand goes to the heart. And if you do that, you begin to make yourself a little bit different. Because the thing about networking, you want to fit in and you want to stand out. And that's the kind of interesting challenge. You want to actually do certain things that help people remember who you are. So you're in the memory kind of game. And I do love the definition of a brand. And I didn't mention it earlier, but a brand is a promise that lives through an experience, that creates a memory, that leads to loyalty and results in clients and customers and repeat sales. And I cobble that together from a few different sources. And I was at the Olympics in France. My mutual buddy had a kid playing in the sevens, Ed Kelly and
Yeah.
Jack. But I thought France epitomized that definition of a brand. It was a sensational location. They had events by the Champs-Élysées, they had events by the Eiffel Tower, they had, show jumping in the Bois de Boulogne. I mean, it was just such an incredible series of things that actually I thought reinforced that definition of what a great brand it was. The Olympics, Paris, and the loyalty that I have to that, and the desire I want to go back.
Love it.
Yeah.
Kingsley, you may have addressed something without knowing it, or tripped over something here today. What comes from the hand comes from the heart. That to me is probably one of the most powerful statements I've heard in this discipline. We are not fighting, we are getting our heads around AI at the moment. And we have a positioning that says digital when I want it, human when I need it. And what we're trying to get the world to think about is that the human touch is so much more important than the tech support. And I think what comes from the hand comes from the heart is a beautiful way to summarize that. It's really powerful. Siobhan, does that stand out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does absolutely, and it's very much aligned with our ethos as an organization around getting that balance right and the power of the human touch. And I just want to circle back to Emma's question as well around assessing your presence inside the organization as a CX leader. Michael, when we do our courses and we speak to people, we talk about having a network of influencers within the organization. And if I was in an organization as a CX leader, I would look at all of the different departments, Emma, look at all of the different departments, because you need as a CX leader to work with all of them and make sure that you have at least one connection in every department that you could sit down with, have a casual cup of coffee with, just to chat, and it could be about what's going on in work, but that you have a real and genuine connection with, that you understand them, you understand their agenda, and you understand them as a human. But looking at all of the different departments within your organization, do you have strong connections in each of those? I would start there in terms of assessing your own presence.
Love it, love it. And there's a great question here from Gina. Again, Kingsley, we may have touched on this. She says, I'm interested to know how remote workers can influence self-promotion. That's a challenge for us, isn't it? And the whole networking sphere.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it opens up the bigger debate about remote working. I mean, where's that going to go? Is it going to be 3 and 2, 4 and 1, or whatever? And I think you're seeing signs of some corporates now demanding people to be back in much more. And I think partly partly the reason is because they want people to be connecting internally with and building internal networks. So I think there's pluses and minuses in all of this, and I think obviously the pluses is it's more convenient and it's cheaper, and you can be in remote locations and all that good stuff, and you can look after family, etc. I think that's all critically important. On the other hand, you're a bit cut off, and it is hard to develop the networks. It's hard if you're not nearby to go out and meet with people. I think there's quite an interesting development around Ireland of these kind of hubs. There's hundreds and hundreds of them now. I spoke at their conference, they're down your way.
Yep.
I think that's where people can, at a regional level, can go in and meet and connect with people. You see, I think we're social animals. We crave human contact, and we just got to be careful. We're not technology doesn't starch the humanity out of our existence. So we got to get that balance between high tech and high touch, and that's a challenge.
Love it, love it. Kingsley, again, off this conference. Have you any plans to be speaking in Saudi in the near future? Is that something somebody has asked that?
No, no, not. No, I might be heading down to Oz for the World Cup in rugby.
Yeah, do it on the way. You could stop. Riyadh wants to hear from you. All right, I'll connect you after this in that particular space. Um, any other questions there, Louise? My apologies. I jumped in and took over your section. Anything else?
Yeah, so Elodie asks, how can CX leaders leverage intentional networking and social capital to influence stakeholders who can view human centricity as a secondary priority?
So if we remove all the CX elements of that, it really the question is how do our leaders who are listening to this show influence leaders within their organization with a customer centric message? Is that kind of summarize it, Kingsley? Is that something you can address?
No, I think it's more up your it's
Okay.
your.
So, how can CX leaders leverage intentional networking, social capital to influence stakeholders who view human-centric? I think there's probably two elements of that, Elodie. The first is leveraging your network and social capital, and I think all of the things that Kingsley talked about today, and like that, having those, and what I mentioned, making sure you have your contacts within all the different departments. But influencing them to view human centricity as a secondary or to not see human centricity as a secondary priority is a whole different thing, I suppose. And it's around showing them the value of human-centered thinking, of customer-centered thinking, and employee-centered thinking. And that's probably a whole different webinar on its own, Elodie. But if you want to have a chat about it separately, let's connect.
Here's one question that I'd like to pass you, Kingsley. What would be the best way to start building a network if you have no experience in this space? Is there a starting point?
Well, we're all, have educational background, school, college, whatever it is. I mean, I remember Herb Kelleher, who's a founder of Southwest Airlines, you'd
Yeah.
know, and actually Michael O'Leary went to work for him and in Southwest, and that's where the whole idea of Ryanair came
Yeah.
out. But I met Herb Keller once, and I asked him because he was a really interesting fella. He had a big long cigar when I met him. His feet were up on the desk. He was drinking a whiskey. It was 11 in the morning. But what was the secret of this whole thing? And he said, "Do stuff." And I thought it was a great couple of words. Do stuff. In other words, do stuff. Get out and about and do stuff. Join clubs, play sports, join debating. Church, whatever it is. Just find ways where you can kind of connect and integrate with people. And that means sometimes pushing it outside your own comfort zone, because, and that's why I made that point about introverts. I think that we sometimes underestimate what we have to offer. And I think networking is such a powerful way of adding to your own
Yeah.
worth.
And Kingsley, another, and I know I want to kind of end it soon because we were going over time here, but have you seen AI impacting the traditional networking process?
Um, so I just did a Diaspora strategy for Lanzarote.
Hmm.
Um, Lanzarote is an island. 85% of their revenue comes from tourism. But when COVID happened, that was a crisis for them. And they suffered from, well, so they had a mass emigration because of various historic reasons. AI, you can find where these people are, where they've gone. You can identify them. So I actually think that, I mean, in that whole world of our diaspora engagement world, the big question is always about their diaspora. Who are they? Where are they? What are they doing? You now finally can get an answer to that question through AI. So I think just so long as there are guardrails and barriers, I think the benign impact of AI can be enormous. And you take something like healthcare, which AI can do amazing things, keeping people out of hospital. Healthcare is such a cost for all our societies, a huge cost for these things. I think it would bring great efficiency.
No, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Siobhan, is there anything else you would like to add? I know there's many, many questions here that we're going to have to review, and we might be able to get some answers back separately via email. Any final thoughts from you, Siobhan?
Look, I think it's just in terms of CX networking and getting out there, making connections within your organization and outside your organization is absolutely critical. And to Elodie's point, you do have to network to be a successful CX leader. You have to have contacts, you have to have allies in all of the different departments that you're working with. In terms of how you convince them that it's the right thing to do, it's about understanding their priorities and their agendas and speaking their language. But do things outside your comfort zone, as Kingsley said, and as I mentioned as well. Speak to people even and set up meetings, even where you don't have an agenda, just to get to know people. But yeah, I think it's don't underestimate it, and absolutely read Kingsley's 50 tips and his metrics book. I can't wait to get stuck into them.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Louise, as always, thank you so much for putting together. We have a remarkable coverage of the globe today. It is from all over. So Kingsley, thank you so much. It's genuinely, it's such an honor to have you on and sharing your insights the way you normally do, and it's just so brilliant. And thank you for that. And just to all of you who are still on the call, just remember this is a trilogy. We have our next session coming up on May 18th. Ian Golding, who's also a good friend of the CX Academy, is going to speak about how to influence once you make that step, once you have that recognition, and now you're sitting in that role of leadership, how you might do that. And then we have Claire White, who's going to join us on June 10th. Again, all of this information will be sent out to you. I know lots of you have already signed up for those programs, but by all means, share them with your colleagues who you think can benefit. Our goal here from the Academy's point of view is to give our graduates and our learners the confidence to take that next step. And Kingsley, what you've shared today is so natural. It's so wonderful to hear it. And it fits in beautifully around that whole human touch element. So fascinating as always. You're a gentleman. Thank you so much, Siobhan. Thank you for your inputs as always. And Louise for getting us here today. Thank you. And Louise, you're going to be sending out an email, I understand, and a recording of this session. You're going to try and get out this evening because I know we're on a long weekend. So if we can get that to everybody, look out for it this evening. You'll get that, but you'll also get the links to all of Kingsley's processes. And by all means, Kingsley, if they want to get in touch with you, I assume you'll be open for that, and you'll be traveling. We will set out a travel plan for you to get to Australia for the World Cup next year. How's that?
You're on, and thank you everybody for listening in. And please connect with me. Connect me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. So there you go.
Super.
Building, Michael.
All righty, and can you see so many? Everybody, gratitude. They're so appreciative of your time and effort today. Thank you for that. Brilliant.
Thanks, Kingsley. Thanks, everyone. Take care.